Joining me now is somebody who's been a host on the show many, many times, and I'm so glad to see her. It's Councilmember Carmen Rivera. She represents District 2 in New York City, which I think covers East Village. I'm reading here: East Village, Gramercy Park, Kips Bay, Lower East Side, Murray Hill, and Rose Hill. Is that all right?
That's right.
So the City Council, I know because we've been airing them, has been doing Zoom hearings. How has that been?
It's been interesting. I would say one thing that's been really great is that there is better attendance, I think, from council members, and also more of the public is able to kind of be a part of the process and kind of hang out in their homes, allowing them to give testimony, and I think it's added to some of the information, to some of the experiences and the stories that we've heard in the council. So it has changed. Of course, it's a little less personal, right? Because I don't get to see my colleagues, and there's certainly a different feeling when you're in person. But I think it's encouraged a different kind of participation that is definitely welcomed.
I also think it segues to the next thing that I want to talk about with you is the open streets, because that's going to be sort of the new normal for a little while. And you really spearheaded this push. Talk to me a little bit about where it stands now and how it's going to evolve, because I'm sure it has to continue to grow.
Definitely. So right now we are kind of, as we go outside, being very, very careful, being responsible, and only going out when we need to. We want to make sure that we have enough space to safely follow social distancing guidelines. And we want to allow our restaurants to responsibly reopen when the time comes as well. Not just our restaurants, our stores that might be a little small, right? Those storefronts in New York City. So we might need the sidewalk space or to actually spill out into the street. So I think the Open Streets program that we started, I introduced the bill, and the mayor is now working with us to open a number of streets across all 5 boroughs. And of course, we want to make sure we're doing it equitably. It allows us to, one, right, be healthy, be responsible, have that 6 feet between you and the next person, but also it's going to allow, I think, our economy and our city to reopen safely and in phases, of course. And it's great that we're seeing open streets added every week, but we absolutely have to do more. And we can't rely on kind of the small street changes that happened at the very beginning. So we want to see an acceleration of course, the previously announced bike lanes to get this done, but also this other vision that I think many New Yorkers have, which is of linear parks and added space, especially in places where large families are crowded into small apartments.
So I was reading just a little bit about this, and I saw here about some of the colleagues and some of the people that you have been speaking to expressing concern about the NYPD enforcement and just recent incidents in certain neighborhoods and certain people that have been more affected by this sort of enforcement. What are your thoughts here?
Their concerns are certainly valid. I think the one thing we need to do is make sure that we have community groups and leaders involved and engaged to help prevent kind of these social distancing challenges that we're seeing across the city. That concern, again, on increasing open space, it kind of increases the territory, right, for NYPD enforcement, which is what we've seen from recent incidents, that there has been somewhat of a targeting in predominantly communities of color. And so we do want to feel safe, but we think that this initiative doesn't have to be led by the NYPD. We think it can be led by these local grassroots groups, by cure violence programs and those credible messengers that have already been involved in kind of this messaging initiative to deliver that to someone who looks like they're from the community, who you've already established a relationship with. And I will tell you, as the chair of the Committee on Hospitals, I've had many conversations with our city's leading medical experts, and they find themselves both infuriated and despondent at the images that they've seen of the sidewalks and parks crowded with New Yorkers, while they and their colleagues are still struggling on the front lines to save lives. So the experts, the people, we want the open streets, we want the space, but we don't want it with the risk of over-policing. So I think by involving these social distance ambassadors that the mayor recently announced, I think it's a good move. It's not going to be enough. We have to entrust our open streets again to community organizations and figures. And so I'm having ongoing conversations with the Department of Transportation, with advocates, but always to make sure that as we participate in the program, that we're really utilizing already those people who are here, who are from our community and who already have these really trusted relationships.
So, I mean, obviously part of what we are trying to create is enough space so people can be active and socially, but at the same time socially be distant, right? And another thing that's important for this is the tracing of this disease and how it's been, who's been infected. Can you talk to me a little bit, considering that you're on the committee of hospitals, what that has meant to how you've been working with the committee?
Sure. So absolutely, the social distancing is to be healthy, and we're entering these next phases, kind of getting over that peak, that real, tragic time in our city's history where we lost so many New Yorkers. And so we're really focusing now on testing and contact tracing. And earlier this month, the Committee on Hospitals held a joint hearing with the Committee on Health to examine the city's plans for COVID-19 testing and tracing. And so our city's public hospital system, which is called New York City Health and Hospitals, a lot of people call it H&H, they're going to be leading this massive and critical effort. And it's new, actually. Contact tracing is something that's been typically led by the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. So that's been a little bit controversial. I was very, very disappointed that, you see our two health-related agencies, DOH, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and then of course, H&H, they had some infighting exposed in the media during such a critical time for our city. And so what we're afraid of, and why we had a nearly 6-hour-long hearing, which is to get not only these plans on the record, but to really ask why, the administration felt that in the middle of a pandemic was the best time to institute what we feel is a bureaucratic reshuffling, potentially creating new and unnecessary obstacles for what is critical, complicated, and sensitive work of contact tracing. So we're hearing more that they're hiring more people. H&H is still very much involved. And we investigated how this added responsibility could potentially impact how H&H serves the city. So we're still, talking. We hope that the mayor would reconsider that decision, because, when you look at H&H, really their main responsibility should be patient care, whereas Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, it's really looking at public health and populations and communities. So while those roles have been traditional, and for a century and a half, DOH has done it really, really, really well, this change was a little bit alarming, but of course we want to make sure that we're focused on the goal, which is to get the job done and to do the best work possible, and to make sure we're taking care of those communities that we all know have been disproportionately impacted.
The New York City budget has to come out, right? It has to be passed by June. And you've been tweeting about it. I've been watching you talk about what needs to happen and the next stimulus, and talk to me a little bit about what you think are the key issues that are going on there and what you've been fighting for.
So we are in the middle of budget negotiations now at the City Council, and we always hope to have a handshake. It's kind of the big moment in the press where we reach an agreement with the mayor's office. Right now, we're facing some serious budget cuts. We're looking at Albany, which is, finally reconvening to see if there's something that could be done, because we know that we need help from Albany, but also from the federal government in Washington. And we've seen, these tranches of funding been released with the stimulus bills and these relief packages, but it really isn't enough for what New Yorkers are facing right now. I always go back to 4 basics: healthcare, housing, education, and food. And in New York City, we also have to worry about transportation. But those 4 to me are what we should always, that's like my guiding principles when it comes to the programs and services that I advocate for in the budget. So right now we're looking at billions of dollars in cuts. And it is really, really troubling and alarming. But we're hoping that, working with the governor, working with the mayor, working with Congress, that we can figure out a way to fund what's the most critical in public services and to take care of our neighborhoods.
Talking about housing, I'll take them one at a time. The first issue being people being able to pay their rents. And I know there's been a large call for cancel rents, forgive rents, and all that, but we really haven't seen anything come down that would that would implement that. Is there any movement in this area? What are you seeing?
Well, there is the cancel rent movement. It's not just right in New York City. It's national. It's kind of all over the world, and people that just are worried about how they're going to make the rent, facing tremendous financial hurdles. And then the money that we saw coming from Washington really left out a large population of New Yorkers, which is our immigrant community, specifically our undocumented New Yorkers. So many people are just worried about how to put food on the table and of course how to pay rent. So I do support the cancel rent bill that is in Albany right now. There is a version in the Assembly and in the State Senate. I'm hoping that they will go back to discuss it. There are other versions of housing support. However, I think right now canceling rent is the way to go. I mean, there are just too many people. I think it was a third of Americans didn't pay rent on April 1st. May 1st already passed and we're approaching June 1st. So something has to be done right now. And when it comes to NYCHA, which are families that are historically a low income, of course, a lot of them, many of them seniors, multiple generations living in these households, they just haven't received the federal funding that they've needed for decades. And so they're relying on capital funding from the city. And of course, a lot of the programs and services that we help to fund inside of the developments. And I'm hoping that we use this opportunity to see how, with all of the hundreds of public housing organizations that came together and said, now is the time to fund our capital needs, that we have the political will and the courage to do that. I think it would be a tremendous relief. This housing has been around for decades. I want it to be here for the next few decades, and there's no reason why we shouldn't use this opportunity to invest in what is truly low-income housing for New Yorkers that contribute to our city, who pay their taxes, and who want to be here for the long haul.
I want to also switch it to small businesses. You recently got a law passed as far as guarantors for small businesses. Not a lot of people have been talking about this. Tell me about this law you just had passed.
Sure. So I just passed a bill to temporarily suspend the personal liability clause in commercial leases. Many times when a small business, they open their storefront, their restaurant, their business, they sign a personal liability clause. And right now, this is a disaster, this pandemic that no one saw coming. So we want to make sure that if that operator is forced to walk away from the business, which we hope that with enough support from Washington, that they will get the support, the aid that they need, that if they do have to walk away from their business where they've invested their lives, right, their dreams and countless hours, that their personal assets, their personal finances won't also be at risk. So this is to protect people who were affected by COVID-19, and it's a part of a larger package to also take care of our delivery workers and some of the larger outside, they're called third-party companies like Grubhub and Seamless, who also take a very, very large percentage of profit from our restaurants to provide this service. There's no reason to do that. So this package was to really help our small businesses continue to survive and hopefully bounce back. And so I'm really proud we passed the bill. It was signed by the mayor. And we're also looking at, since we discuss open streets, how to also help restaurants come back. I mean, the restaurant industry is probably the largest employer in New York City. And just think of all the jobs that means. So we want them to come back. And so I think this small business package was certainly a good step in the right direction, right? It wasn't a cure-all, but I'm glad that we got it done. And hopefully there's more work that we could do and more laws that we can pass that help our New York City mom and pops.
So I want to talk about something that may not seem like to many is as important as food or small businesses, but the summer youth employment program that got cut from the budget. There has been a lot of advocates that have called for that to be reevaluated, and I wanted to sort of just get your take on it.
Sure. Well, so the summer youth employment program is something that is a program that's really important for our young people. At risk, typically low income, young people of color, many of them, their families are essential workers or on the front line. And so this program has been cut right now by the mayor's office, and we're fighting to restore it fully. If we cannot completely restore the program, we are looking to think of some sort of innovative way to supplement that idea, because for those who are able to kind of retain their internship at some private company, these individuals who historically have had access to opportunity, the young people who are a part of summer youth, they don't really have that access. And so I will tell you, as a young, Latina woman of color growing up in New York City, having that summer job was critical to my family's survival. And so as I hear more and more young people come out to our virtual press conferences and our rallies, and they tell their story about how the one thing they really wanted to do was to help that single parent household, help buy those books for the new school year, that's my story. So this is certainly a priority for me to make sure that, with pools being closed and no beaches and our libraries kind of figuring out what's next, that our young people have something to do and they receive the personal and professional development that they deserve.
Thank you so much. Let people know how they can get in touch with your office, even though I know you're not in your office, but how can they reach you?
Our office is absolutely available to everyone remotely, though our district office might not be open. We are taking calls, emails, direct messages. You can contact us at District 2, that's DISTRICT, and the number 2 at council.nyc.gov. And you can always follow me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. I also respond that way. And please just let us know how we can be of service to you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Rivera. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Joining me now from Teens Take Charge is Carmen Lopez Villamil. Carmen, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I want to talk to you about the summer youth program and how it's been canceled. And tell me first what it means to the kids in this city and what you guys are doing to fight back.
So the Summer Youth Employment Program serves 75,000 young New Yorkers every year. That means it's 6 weeks of employment for students or young people, and that in every week they're getting a paycheck in addition to college and career readiness. So under normal circumstances, this means that students are getting a source of independent income and a chance to sort of discover a lot of opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise, because these are all low-income youth, and 81% are students of color. But right now, it's so much more necessary. Normally, it means that people get a source of income. This is not the time to cut that. Now we're facing even more financial worry. We're facing emotional trauma and learning loss from remote schooling, which for a lot of students isn't actually happening. So this is the time when we really need more learning opportunities and more funding for our students. So Teens Take Charge has started an initiative working with hundreds of other organizations to reinstate SYEP with full funding and jobs for at least 75,000 young New Yorkers. So that's included starting a petition, which has gained 29,000 signatures, and gaining the support of over half of the city council. So right now we're in a good place. We have support, but we really just have to get the mayor to put SYEP back into the city budget.
So talk to me a little bit about the hashtag Save SYEP. Is there an active campaign? Can people go to your website? Can people donate? What can people do?
Yes. So first of all, if you're really passionate about this, post something on Twitter and Instagram with the hashtag Save SYEP. Get your story out there and let our elected officials know that we really need this program. But you can also go to teenstakecharge.com/SYEP. And there are links to daily action emails, which are sort of simple ways to communicate with your elected officials, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, with very concerted actions. If you've participated in SYEP or you know someone who has, we can get you to talk to media. You can tell us your testimonies and we will get those to city council members. And above all, I think you can just learn a little bit more about the program and why it's so necessary.
It's the oldest, it's the biggest summer youth program in the country, and it services a lot of children. And you yourself were a part of it. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell me about what your experience was like.
So I participated in the Summer Youth Employment Program the summer after my sophomore year, and I worked in a biotechnology lab. So that's the kind of job that a public school student in New York City typically doesn't get. But that meant that I was able to go to the lab during the summer. I learned about molecular biology. I got to work in the lab, and I got paid for it. So that was me getting career readiness. It helps me in AP biology now. And I got a paycheck, which I think was the most important part for me. and the most important part of SYP for most students.
The city has been on pause, the state has been on pause, and a lot of funding, a lot of taxes, a lot of revenue has dried up in the city. And this is a reaction to that financial fallout. What is your argument to the mayor, to the city council, to any person that might be listening as to why this program should be the one that the money that we do have is spent?
Yeah, we understand that the economy has sort of collapsed and the mayor has had to make budget cuts, but this cannot be the program that he cuts. This program serves low-income young people who are most in need of jobs right now. The coronavirus has essentially wiped out industry, increased unemployment. It means that families aren't getting enough income. They've left access to food, to resources, to sort of basic necessities. And these are the people that need money. Low-income students, low-income families need money right now. And cutting this program is essentially saying that he doesn't care about these families. It also means that he's taking away $124 million out of the budget, affecting completely low-income, mostly students of color, but he's maintaining, I think it's like 99.6% of the NYPD's budget, and has increased the amount of school policing that they plan to do next year. So this is an explicit target on low-income students of color, and that really can't be what we're doing during this crisis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I'm joined now by Assemblymember Carmen de la Rosa, who represents the 72nd District in New York City, and that's Hamilton Heights, Inwood, Harlem, Washington Heights, and Manhattan. And I see you're outside right now, and you told me that it's because you were just delivering food. What kind of things are you doing for your constituents? What other kind of things?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And yes, we're outside right now because we just joined NIMIC, Northern Manhattan Improvement Corp, to hand out and distribute food to our community. I think that, representing a minority community of color, a community made up of working class people, the number one need right now has been food access. And so that's been a big part of what we do. We've teamed up not only with NIMIC, but also with Catholic Charities, and we've teamed up with other nonprofit organizations and grassroots group in the community that are actually delivering food, not only to those that are most in need, but to seniors who can't leave their apartments or people who have been sick and vulnerable. I think that it's part of our job as government officials to make sure that we're stepping up, and there's no reason why anyone in our community should go hungry. And so that's been a big part of the work we've been doing. And in addition to that, we've also been working with different people who have been calling our office with unemployment claims. That has been a major part of our constituent services. As you know, 2 million New Yorkers have applied for unemployment since the onset of COVID-19. And so our office has been working diligently to make sure that folks in our community are receiving access to these unemployment benefits that are so needed right now in order for them to pay their rent, pay their utility bills, and put food on the table really for their families. So that's the bulk of the work we've been doing, obviously assisting people with any cases that may come through our community. We set up a remote office. Our phones are all connected to the district office, so anyone that calls our office has someone they can talk to every single day. And we're answering hundreds and hundreds of emails as they come in. But a lot of that work is really on the ground, making sure that our community is fed and taken care of.
You've also been a huge supporter of cancel rent. I know that's so critical and so important for so many people who are struggling to meet the monthly rent bill that's coming in very soon. Talk to me about where that is.
Yeah, last year, Albany had a huge victory that was a people-led victory, and it was the victory to make sure that rent reform happened in New York State. I was proud to be part of that fight. In my district, the 72nd Assembly District, we have the largest number of rent-stabilized tenants in the state of New York. And as someone who has been on the receiving end of an eviction notice, as a child, my parents were blacklisted for having an eviction notice on our door. I know that the struggles of displacement are real in our community. And so I've joined in this time the Housing Justice Coalition as a member of the Housing Committee in the Assembly to make sure that we cancel rents. I think it's not enough to put in a freeze because we know that our communities can't afford the rent, even in regular times. And that we are such at risk for displacement. And so I believe that canceling the rent so that people don't have to go back 3 or 6 months to pay those rent arrears is important. We're working on legislation. We understand the concern of obviously landlords who say, well, we owe the bank money for these investments. And what I think we need to do is come up with a solution where we're bringing tax abatements and other reliefs to the landlord, but with the priority in mind that tenants need to have a home. When we look at the disparities of communities of color, one of the things that has been so unique about why our communities are dying at the rates that they are is because of our housing conditions. We often live doubled up, tripled up, and there is a homeless factor, in my opinion, that exists when you have 3, 4 families that are living in a 1-bedroom, right? Technically, there's members of that family that would be homeless if they didn't have that couch or that family member who gave them a room to sleep in while they go about their lives. And so I think we need to redefine what the tenant movement looks like as far as who are the real homeless people in our community, and how do we make sure that we're bringing relief so that displacement doesn't continue to be the norm for these communities. You can't heal from COVID or any other disease if you're sleeping in the train station, as we've seen, or if you're sleeping in the streets, or if you don't have a dignified place to lay your head and actually quarantine and take care of yourself. And so I think that has to be part of the work that we do in Albany, but also the work that we do here locally in the city.
How are you seeing the NYCHA buildings be handled now? Has there been any improvement?
NYCHA is something that's very worrisome. First of all, we know that the capital needs of NYCHA haven't been met. So before the pandemic even broke, we know that there was gross neglect as far as the funding that's coming to our NYCHA buildings, right? We know that money in order to make sure that NYCHA is sanitized, that elevators are clean, that the hallways and the common spaces are clean, that's important. I think that we're starting now to see some improvements. We are hearing from a state-run program and a city-run program where they are going to be sending in folks who are going to go visit NYCHA tenants one by one to offer testing and offer wraparound services. I think that's a good start, but I think that we need to make a more significant investment in the infrastructure of NYCHA, because really NYCHA is our only way to combat some of the displacement that is happening in our communities. Public housing has to be a tool to keep low-income people housed, right? And we need to give value to that tool. And so I think that it's improving, but I think there's so much more work to do when it comes to NYCHA.
So let me ask you, there was recently data that was released by the city about the zip codes that have been affected by COVID, and how you can totally just absolutely see how much more affected neighborhoods that you represent have been hit by this disease. Are you able to communicate with constituents as far as getting testing and getting antibody testing? Have you been able to get people motivated to get to their doctors and get to the testing sites?
Yeah, I think that, when the pandemic hit, we were really slow in rolling out the testing, right? And I think that was a disservice to a lot of our elderly and our sick, because at this point, what happened was that there was a fear that was instilled in our communities about going to hospitals, about going to go get testing. In my community, we had our first testing site put in about a month into the pandemic, right? So I would say mid to late March. And by that time, we had already seen a great number of deaths. In addition to that, then we later had another test site put in the Inwood section of my district. But still, I think one of the things that I saw was that there were certain pockets of the community that up until today still don't have testing sites. So the inequities that exist in where we're putting these sites, and trying to convince people to leave their homes in order to go and get the testing has been difficult. The antibody testing, getting the information to folks as to where they can get antibody testing. Just yesterday, I heard from the mayor's office, and I'm grateful that this week in Washington Heights and Inwood, they're going to roll out 3 pop-up sites for 1 week each, where people can go and get both the COVID-19 and also the antibody test. And so I think that that's going to start to make a difference. I also think that we'll see a clearer picture of what those numbers look like. I looked at the maps that you mentioned by zip code, and I saw that in my district, there were areas of my district that didn't have a lot of data And the number seems low to me, given what I've seen on the ground. I think that, for example, I saw that parts of my district had higher numbers than others. And then there were parts of my district that when you click on the map, you couldn't see the full picture. You couldn't see what the numbers were. So I think we still have to work on the data transparency portion of it. I'd also love to see a breakdown around the ethnic lines, right? How many Latinos, how many Black? We've seen an overall number, but we haven't seen the breakdown. Yesterday, I actually saw a unique overlay of that map with nail salon workers. And I thought that was so interesting because when you look at the nail salon industry, you know that those are mostly immigrants, mostly low-income workers. And when you start to think about this data on a broken out set like nail salon workers, it makes you think about, janitors, and it makes you think about maintenance people. It makes you think about educators. How are we breaking down that data to get a full picture of the first responders, the essential workers that have actually been impacted and who they are? And so I look forward to continuing to work to get more transparency around it. I think we're making great strides, but more needs to be done.
You mentioned, nail salons and those small businesses that really make up your district. Are you seeing them get the access to the PPP loans and the small business loans that has been given out as a stimulus?
Yeah, I think that the PPP program, the first round of it was another failure, to be honest. We saw that a lot of our small businesses that did not have relationships with name brand banks were not able to access the loans. We saw that a lot of the banking institutions that actually have served traditionally communities of color didn't have the ability to break in to what the PPP was. I know there's been a second round and I'm hearing that it's going better for some of our small businesses. When it comes to the economy and reopening, we have to make sure that the regulations that are going to be imposed on our small businesses, for example, sanitary regulations about social distancing, that our small businesses actually have the tools to be successful. Because, for example, if we say that all employees must wear face coverings and use gloves, how are we expecting businesses that have been closed for months, that are operating right now on deficits, to have enough capital to invest on making sure that there's enough PPE, to make sure that there's enough detergent, that there's enough personnel that is there in order to service our communities properly? We know that a lot of people have tapped into the unemployment networks and are now receiving unemployment. Some people are receiving more unemployment than they did income when they were actually working in some of these low-wage jobs. So what happens to that workforce, right? And I think we have to really take a good look at what incentives we're going to have there for our small businesses so that they can operate. And we talked about rents earlier. What's going to happen with our small businesses? A small business in my district pays $30,000 a month in rent. If they've been out of work for 3 months, that's $90,000. Where are they going to get that $90,000 in one shot to be up to date with their rent and not close their doors? So there's much more that needs to happen when it comes to supporting our small businesses.
So another thing that I think is very crucial, especially to an area like Inwood and Washington Heights, is access to the trains. I mean, are you comfortable with how they're dealing with the cleaning of the trains and the 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. shutdown? What's your thoughts on that?
Look, I've always think that mass transit is the lifeline for communities that are working class, right? If you're working class, you don't own a car. You don't have any other way to get to work. I think that the disinfection is necessary, but we need to find a more adequate way to handle that. First of all, I think that it's inhumane for us to go on subway platforms without offering an alternative to the homeless who are living there, to kick them all out at once. I think we have to really send social workers in to deal with the wraparound service substance abuse that exists with this population.
Just a couple more questions. So I understand you're working with advocates to get parolees released who would be eligible, that are non-threatening, and tell me why that's important right now.
So, people, and rightfully so, have made a very huge deal about what's happening in nursing homes, right? Nursing home populations are very vulnerable right now because they're elderly, because they're congregated in settings where they're not able to quarantine on their own. Imagine the situation in our prisons. Here in New York State, we know that the prisons are a hotbed for COVID-19. One of the things that has been very alarming is that we haven't received the data, again, going back to the data points, about how many people have actually died or are sick in our prisons. I think that the community that I represent has been one that has been really impacted by criminal justice and who's arrested. And it's not a coincidence that those same factors are killing people here in our communities on the streets on a daily basis. So you could only imagine those health factors that do exist, cardiac factors, environmental factors, that are the same ones that also exist for our brothers and sisters that are incarcerated. And so we've been working before the pandemic started with an elder parole bill that grants the ability for someone who has served longer than 15 years of their sentence and is over 55 to go before the parole board and be granted a release. If they've shown to transform their lives, if they've shown that they're no longer a danger to society. I really believe in a criminal justice system that is transformative and not necessarily overly punitive. I believe that people are not the sum of their worst mistakes. And so we need to give the opportunity for folks who right now are vulnerable. If we say that our seniors are vulnerable, if we say that people who have heart conditions and asthma and obesity are vulnerable, then those are the same conditions that exist for New Yorkers who are in prison. And those people are our brothers, are our sisters, are our neighbors. And they should also be given the opportunity to not be sentenced to death in New York through COVID-19. And so we're working very hard and diligently, one, to call on the governor to grant clemency to some of these folks that have already been sick with COVID, and two, to look at the elder parole bill and support the mission of granting the ability to go before the parole board and plead their case. If you've served 15 years in prison, statistics show that you are less likely to reoffend. Also, if you're elderly, you're way less likely to reoffend. So this is the population that we're looking at and that we hope to have some resolution for in the coming days.
Assemblymember Carmen de la Rosa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the time and for the platform, and I hope you and your family are well.
Welcome, Commissioner. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. So let's just talk about what reopening looks like. I mean, many businesses are clamoring to reopen. What does it look like for the small business owner right now?
You know, what we wanted to make sure for our small businesses that they have the necessary tools and the information, right, and clarity on the regulatory requirements going forward before we start to really move to opening it. The governor has set a sort of a phased approach, which the whole state is under, which begins to implement, I think, in the next two weeks or so. And so our job really at SBS is to make sure we communicate effectively what those new regulatory requirements are and give the small businesses, you know, the necessary information that they need. The last thing I'll say is, you know, we want to make sure that when we open up, that businesses have the ability to thrive and to really adapt in this environment. And the important component of that is for us to make sure that we don't have a boomerang effect as it pertains to the health crisis, right? And so we want to make sure that everybody's opening up safe, smart way. Our job is to help them do that. And then to, you know, help us not to go backwards as it pertains to the health crisis. It's the health crisis that brought on this ensued economic crisis, right? And so we want to make sure all that we do, we help businesses get back open safely and give them the ability to really thrive as their businesses in this new sort of environment that we're in.
How do you reach that goal? How do you reach the goal of opening up the restaurants and the small mom and pop stores safely? And how difficult do you think that's going to be?
Well, I think we have a structure in place, an infrastructure in place at the city and the Department of Small Business Services, and also all of our sister agencies who work in concert to help small businesses, right? So there's an infrastructure already laid. And we're going to be building on that infrastructure. So from a government standpoint and sort of the small business services standpoint, we have the infrastructure to help you do so. And so the challenge is just work that we need to do and sort of change the way we do our work and make those adjustments for the small businesses. I think on the small businesses side, I mean, there is going to be some adjustments that need to be made. And then we have to work with them to make sure that those adjustments are made in an appropriate way, in the way that they can actually, conduct business. The mayor set up some advisory councils, sector advisory councils, and those advisory councils, we have, the restaurants and the mom and pop shops and also large businesses and others on those advisory councils who are giving us input on the things that they need and the challenges that they face, and making sure that once we put our framework in place, that it will be, it would be sort of like end user friendly, it would be simple so that our folks can understand it, but also that their recommendations have been incorporated into the process.
So tell me, I've heard you say infrastructure a couple times. Talk to me about what that looks like. What does that mean?
Absolutely. So here at SBS, we have, business solution centers across the city. In our business solution centers, we provide technical assistance, we provide webinars, we provide access to capital and resources. We link businesses and connect them to lenders and philanthropic funding. Also at those centers, we also help businesses or forward them or work with them, businesses who are seeking employees for specific jobs that they may have, et cetera. And so on top of the business solution centers, we have 18 Workforce One centers across the city who help job seekers find jobs, okay? And we're doing that with our Food Czar team, with essential businesses, our clinical and healthcare candidates who are looking for work right now. We're working with health and hospitals about transferring patients to hotels. All of these things we are working, and as part of our sort of network to make sure that we help businesses. Also on our website, we do have our resource page there that you can go to, and then if you go to that website, you'll be able to see additional resources. So we have the infrastructure both in the community and at the city level to really help those small businesses to get to where they need to be.
Right. I think the city is reporting that there's some 300,000 small jobs that have been lost just last month. And bringing those jobs back is going to be, I imagine, one of the #1 goals that you have. And that means also that they have to be able to pay those people. Are there programs in place to help small businesses bridge the gap between the revenue that they're not going to be having because of this pause that we've been on?
Yeah, I think, there are several programs that exist now that we are helping our small businesses connect to. The governor just released a $100 million New York Forward Loan Fund, which is helping those who did not get assistance up to now. And I think that's a great product for our small businesses that we're going to help connect them to. The federal government as well continue to have the Paycheck Protection Program. That PPP program is essential at this time for our small businesses to help them with retaining employees and helping them with some overhead expenses. As you can imagine, earlier on in that program, we worked with our small business community to make sure that their voices were heard, and our federal elected officials were actually engaging in the necessary changes that program needed. And I believe the HEROES Act is out there and is being debated, and certainly something that we want to make sure that our small businesses know that PPP program is still open. And I believe it has $100 billion still in that program, that if they haven't used that yet or received a loan or from that program, they should. The loan is forgivable if you meet certain criteria, which I think is also essential. So it just becomes a grant essentially, if done right, and make sure that you get the assistance to do so. And that's what our office does.
That's great, because, we speak to a lot of the representatives who are telling us that the small business, the under 10 employees, the minority business owners are just not getting those PPP loans because they don't have the associations with the banks that are getting that, have access to those funds. So you're saying that there is a program in place or a way that you can bridge that gap?
Yeah, so there was initially several challenges with the PPP program. one really reflective of the challenge we have here at the city where our rents are concerned. And so 25% of the loan product was to go to overhead expenses and rent. And obviously that's a challenge for us. And we did ask our federal partners to say, can we raise that or make it more flexible, maybe 50% or so. And so that's, I believe, in the new proposals that are out there. And I also think that it's critical to let folks know, like we're the one-stop shop for small businesses, right? And so, if you're having challenges with your PPP loan application or making sure that you are able to know where the resources are, that's why we're here. And we want to make sure that we help you to get to the right information, but also essentially a white glove service to make sure that you have our support and help to walk you through the process all the way to the end. And that's what our webinars are for. That's what our one-on-one technical assistance and support services are for, to help you to get those loans. And certainly on last thing I'll say on minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses who are unable to access that fund, I believe part of the challenge initially was how I think the program was structured and how banks were utilizing that program. From our perspective, we lobbied and pushed hard for the federal government to include CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, and those CDFIs have been lending a significant amount of dollars out to really businesses that we know are impacted the most. That's our minority businesses, women-owned businesses, small mom and pop businesses who are struggling even more so. And so we know that those CDFIs are connected to those businesses, and we were able to effectively lobby to make sure that there's an allocation, a separate allocation for those CDFIs. And just as an example of how this has worked, the average loan size when we started with STEM 1 was $200,000. Now I believe it's down to about $43,000 or so. When you think about that, that speaks to the size of the company. And so we know we're hitting and getting to the smaller businesses with this tranche that's out there currently.
That's great. That's great. Can you talk to me just a little bit about the New York City Small Business Continuity Loan Fund?
Yeah, sure. So initially when we started out with this program, it's based upon what we were hearing from the communities. Our community partners, our bids, our business associations came together to say, there's a challenge. We have an immediate impact that's occurring right now. So the city had set aside some funding and then went and raised some private dollars funding in order for us to serve our small businesses. It was for small businesses up to 75 employees. Up to 100 employees, up to $75,000 that they can get. And so that program, due to overwhelming response and also the fact that the federal government programs came into effect, we did close that program, but we were able to get out, I believe about $20 million or so out the door. We're also connecting, just so you know, we're also connecting our small businesses to other resources for funding, such as we have 40 lenders in our network as SBS who lend upwards of $70 million or so a year through our referral services to small businesses. And so we've tapped those resources as well. And so to date, I think we are around 60 million if you combine all of the grant programs and all of the loan programs and our awards from our 40 lenders to small businesses. And so, we'll continue to work with them, but that program, as mentioned, has been closed again, but we have all these other additional resources that we help facilitating the need that our small businesses need in order for them to get the financing to continue to conduct business.
Okay, great. I want to now just do a little pivot to the legislation that Mayor de Blasio just signed for relief for tenant commercial establishments and restaurants during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll just go down the list, starting with the top. So the first one prohibits third-party food delivery services from charging a fee for telephone orders. Talk to me a little bit about that. Just give people a bullet point on what these 7 things are.
I think we want to make sure that we are not hindering businesses from actually engaging in business, right? And I think part of my job as a new commissioner is to really look at fee structures, both what the private sector charge our small businesses, but also what we as a city charge our small businesses to conduct business in the city. So that's all of our fines, all of the requirements, and really looking at it. You know, in the past few years, we've put $100 million back essentially in the hands of small businesses by the regulatory reform and fee reform. And we were going to continue to expand on that. So all those bills that the mayor signed are, you know, around, you know, fee structures, also around discrimination. So if you are a business owner or have employees, et cetera, and you are impacted by COVID, that you cannot be discriminated against. Landlords cannot discriminate against you. They cannot charge you additional dollars for that. They cannot, you know, refuse to engage with you on your lease, et cetera. So again, there are protections around the fee structure, making sure you're not being overcharged and disparately impacted by those fees. And then the next bucket really dealt a lot with, you know, how businesses are actually treated by their landlords and others to make sure that there's not discrimination. And so, you know, I feel like restaurants, and we've heard from them, they had wanted this, you know, for some time, right? And being overcharged by delivery apps and so forth, and also who are not being responsive at this time to the need in the community. And so, you know, we sort of, these bills made it clear and sent a clear message to these, to the restaurants that we at the city, we're working for them, but also to the industry, right? And to the market, that this is not an acceptable practice at this time. And we want to make sure that they know that now it is illegal to do so. And so therefore, it helps us, again, when we talk about recovery, it helps us to gear our small business up for success.
That's really great. Tell people how they can get to your services.
Well, I think the easiest way that you can connect to all that I've said is to just go to our website. It's nyc.gov/COVID-19 BIZ. And so when you go there, that's our resource page. It has a list of all of the resources that we have, including everything I said and a bunch more to really help our businesses get through this crisis.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Doris. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time.
Welcome back to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. My name is Victoria Bert. I'm the producer of this show. We're going to talk now about public transportation and the MTA. And joining me now from the Riders Alliance is Stephanie Burgos Vergas. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Hello there. How's it going? I'm well.
Good to see you. So talk to me about how public transportation has been affected on many, many levels for New Yorkers.
You know, when COVID happened and the stay-at-home, you know, was announced, the MTA saw around 95% decrease in ridership on subways, and I want to say around 87% on buses. And the thing about MTA is that it's bigger than subways and buses, right? MTA is a 5-arm agency. It includes buses, it includes subways, it includes the LIRR, the Metro North, and the bridges and tunnels. And so that means that they're losing revenue from all of those places, and it's really impacting the MTA. But the thing is that the MTA can't shut down, because regardless of the decrease in ridership, there's still 1 million New Yorkers taking public transit every single day. It has brought us to asking the federal government to help the MTA to continue running service.
Tell people a little bit about the Riders Alliance.
So the Riders Alliance, we're a grassroots organization of subway and bus riders. We've been around for 8 years, and you know, we primarily focus on bus and subway, not the whole MTA. And what we do is that we put the needs of riders front and center. A lot of New Yorkers don't own cars. Without transit, people are stranded. And you do not want 8 million people in cars in New York City, because you'll still be stranded in traffic. So what we do and what we've been doing is that we remind our elected officials, we remind our representatives that public transportation is something that is very, very critical. It's critical to our infrastructure, it's critical to our economy, and it's critical to the lives of our New Yorkers.
Talk to me a little bit about how much money the MTA is losing.
Right now, they're losing $200 million a week, and they're estimated that they're going to lose $8 billion by the time that we're able to go back.
What do you think about how they're handling the cleaning of the subways?
It's a very bold move, and we think that it's necessary. We know that the governor and the MTA need to do everything that is possible to make sure that riders feel comfortable going back into the subways, because if not, the MTA will continue to suffer, because then they won't make that money that they need.
So they're cleaning the subways from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. What do you think the impact is on riders?
Well, right now there are around 11,000 riders that take subways from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. So for someone to get from Inwood, New York to Queens, that might mean 8 buses or 9 buses.
Tell me what the top complaints you're hearing from riders are right now.
So a lot of people have been saying that buses are just really crowded. And remember, the majority of essential workers are bus riders. And so they're saying that they're seeing a big problem on buses. You know, they're crammed up. And we know that MTA, a lot of workers who work for MTA have been sick. They've had a workforce decrease. So they don't have the manpower or the woman power to provide enough service. And so they're waiting really long times to then be on a crowded bus.
And also, I know I've been reading a lot of articles about the homeless situation on the subways.
Yeah, and that's been a big thing. The MTA's approach at the moment, which is to kick them off the subway, is not the solution, because it doesn't solve the issue, which is this person doesn't have a home. The governor and both the mayor have the complete power to solve this. A lot of people are calling for the empty hotels to be used as housing, as temporary housing for the homeless New Yorkers on the train.
So I just want to ask you to tell us how we can get involved. How can we help? Do we email you? Do we email the Writers Alliance? Do we tweet at you? What should we do if we have an issue or want something solved?
So there's a few things, right? I think the first thing is follow us on our social media pages. You can, if you're a Twitter follower, you can go to Writers Alliance, follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram at Writers Alliance or on Facebook. 2 is visit our website to join our upcoming meetings, which are all virtual right now. 3 is to text rescue to 52886. And 4, when you go to our website, please consider donating. You can donate anywhere from $2 a month.
And that basically gives a collective group of people a single voice to take to representatives, correct?
Absolutely. That's exactly who we are. We bring all these people from across the city, from different economic backgrounds, from, you know, the one thing that everyone has in common, or at least most people in New York have in common, is that we take transit.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.